Bruce Lee caught the thrown knife by the handle on the third take, and the moment his fingers closed around the grip he felt the unmistakable weight of sharpened steel instead of rubber. Remember this detail, because in the next 2 seconds, Bruce has to decide whether to stop the entire production in front of 40 crew members, or trust the props department and keep the blade moving toward his co-star's throat. The scene was supposed to be simple. A villain throws a knife at the hero. The hero catches it mid-air, reverses his grip, and lunges forward to press the blade against the villain's neck in a show of superior skill. They had rehearsed it 6 times that morning with the rubber prop, and each time Bruce had caught the knife cleanly and stopped the blade exactly 1 inch from his co-star's Adam's apple. The choreography was precise. The timing was perfect. All they needed was 1 clean take with the cameras rolling. Write in the comments, where are you listening to this story from? And what time is it right now? The film was shooting on a closed soundstage in the Golden Harvest complex, a cavernous space filled with fake walls and artificial lighting rigs that could transform into any location the script demanded. The air smelled of sawdust and fresh paint, the scent of sets being built and rebuilt between scenes. Today the soundstage was dressed as an opium den from the 1930s, red silk curtains that caught the light like pools of blood, carved wooden furniture imported from antique dealers across Kowloon, and ceramic vases that would shatter dramatically when the fight scene reached its climax. 43 people were working on the production: camera operators, lighting technicians, sound engineers, makeup artists, costume assistants, and the ever-present runners who carried messages and coffee between departments. Bruce's co-star was a veteran character actor named Henry Wong, a man in his 50s who had been playing villains in Hong Kong cinema since before Bruce was born. Henry had a distinctive face, sharp cheekbones, hooded eyes, a thin mustache that made him look perpetually sinister, and a reputation for absolute professionalism. He never complained about long hours, he never missed his mark, and he trusted Bruce completely when it came to the fight choreography. That trust was about to be tested in a way neither of them expected. The director called for the third take. The soundstage fell silent, except for the hum of the lights. Bruce took his position at the far end of the set, 12 feet from where Henry stood with the knife in his hand. The rubber prop had been replaced between takes, standard procedure when a prop showed signs of wear, and Bruce hadn't thought to check the replacement himself. That was the props department's job. That was what they were paid for. Action. Henry drew back his arm and threw the knife with the practiced motion they had rehearsed all morning. The blade spun through the air, catching the studio lights, creating a blur of motion that the camera would capture in beautiful slow detail. Bruce's hand shot out. His fingers closed around the handle, and that was when everything changed. Notice what Bruce felt in that fraction of a second. The weight was wrong. Rubber props are light, hollow, designed to look dangerous without being dangerous. This knife had heft. This knife had balance. This knife felt exactly like the real throwing knives Bruce had trained with for years in his martial arts practice. His eyes dropped to the blade, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The edge wasn't painted rubber. It was sharpened steel, gleaming under the studio lights with the unmistakable shine of a weapon that could cut through flesh and bone without resistance. He was already moving toward Henry. The choreography called for him to close the distance in 3 quick steps and press the blade to his co-star's throat. His body was in motion. His muscle memory was executing the sequence they had rehearsed, and in his hand, he held a weapon that could kill the man standing in front of him. Wait, because what Bruce does in the next 1.5 seconds will determine whether this story ends with a successful take or a trip to the emergency room. Time seemed to slow down. Bruce was aware of everything at once: the heat of the studio lights on his face, the smell of the fake incense burning in the ceramic holders, the soft whir of the camera capturing every frame, the expectant faces of the crew watching from behind the equipment. He was 3 steps from Henry, 2 steps, One step, he stopped. The blade hung in the air, frozen 6 inches from Henry's throat instead of 1. Bruce's arm was rigid, every muscle locked in place, fighting against the momentum that wanted to carry the knife forward to its choreographed destination. "Cut," the director shouted, his voice sharp with irritation. "Bruce, what happened?" The blade was supposed to go to his neck. Bruce didn't answer immediately. He was staring at the knife in his hand, turning it slowly so the light caught the edge. Then he looked up at the director, a young man named Peter Chen who had been given this film as his first major production, and spoke in a voice that was calm on the surface, but carried an undercurrent of controlled fury. "This isn't a prop." The words fell into the soundstage, like stones, into still water. Ripples of confusion spread through the crew. People glanced at each other, uncertain what they had just heard. "What do you mean, it's not a prop?" Peter asked, stepping forward from behind the camera. Bruce held up the knife, angling it so the blade caught the light for everyone to see. "I mean, this is real steel, sharpened. If I had completed the move, Henry would be bleeding out on this floor right now." Listen to the silence that followed. It wasn't the silence of confusion or disbelief. It was the silence of 43 people, simultaneously realizing how close they had come to witnessing a tragedy. Henry Wong, the veteran actor, who had been standing perfectly still with the blade 6 inches from his throat, took one careful step backward. His face had gone pale beneath the stage makeup. His hands were shaking slightly at his sides. "Real," he said. His voice cracked on the word. "That was a real knife?" Bruce nodded slowly. Then he turned toward the props department, where 3 young men in work clothes stood frozen behind a table covered with weapons, costumes, and equipment. "Who loaded this knife?" For the third take, stop for a moment and understand what's happening on this soundstage. Bruce Lee, the star of the film, the man whose name would appear above the title on every poster and advertisement, was about to confront his own crew about a mistake that could have killed someone. In the hierarchy of Hong Kong film production, stars didn't question crew members directly. Stars spoke to directors. Directors spoke to department heads. Department heads disciplined their own people. That was how things worked. But Bruce wasn't interested in how things worked. He was interested in how things should work. The oldest of the 3 props assistants, a man in his late 20s with a thin beard and nervous eyes, stepped forward. "I did, Mr. Lee. I loaded the knife." "Where did you get it?" "From the weapons case." "The same case we've been using all day." "Show me." The props assistant led Bruce across the soundstage to a long metal case that lay open on a folding table. Inside, arranged in neat rows on foam padding, were a dozen knives of various sizes and styles. Some were obviously rubber, their edges soft and slightly wavy, their surfaces painted to simulate steel. But 3 of the knives were different. 3 of them gleamed with the unmistakable shine of real metal. Bruce pointed at the real knives. "Why are these in the same case as the props?" The assistant's face went red. "They're reference pieces for the actors to hold during lighting tests, so the reflections look right. We've always kept them together. It's never been a problem before. It's a problem now." Bruce picked up one of the real knives and held it next to the rubber prop. "Look at these. In this light, from 3 feet away, can you tell the difference?" The assistant looked. His nervous eyes moved back and forth between the 2 blades. After a long moment, he shook his head. "Neither could I," Bruce said. "Not until I felt the weight in my hand. And by then I was already moving toward Henry's throat." Here's what you need to understand about this moment. Bruce Lee wasn't angry because someone had made a mistake. Mistakes happen on film sets every day. Missed cues, flubbed lines, equipment failures, costume malfunctions. What made Bruce angry was the system that allowed the mistake to happen. Real weapons stored with fake ones. No clear labeling, no double-check procedure, no safety protocol to catch the error before it became a catastrophe. The props assistant, Looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "I'm sorry, Mr. Lee. I should have checked. I should have." "Yes, you should have. But so should your supervisor. And so should the department head. And so should the director. And so should I." Bruce set both knives down on the table. "This isn't about blame. This is about making sure it never happens again." He turned and walked back to the center of the soundstage, where the director and the rest of the crew were still standing in uncertain silence. Henry Wong had retreated to his chair at the edge of the set and was drinking water with trembling hands. "We're shutting down for the rest of the day," Bruce announced. His voice carried across the entire space without effort. "I want every weapon on this production pulled and inspected. Real steel gets locked in a separate case with a different color label. From now on, before any weapon is used in a scene, the actor will personally verify that it's a prop, no exceptions." Wait, because how the director responds to this will reveal exactly what kind of production this is going to be. Peter Chen, the young director, stepped forward with an expression that was equal parts embarrassment and defensiveness. "Bruce, I understand you're upset, but we're already behind schedule. The studio is expecting dailies by Friday. If we shut down now, then we shut down." Bruce's voice was quiet, but there was no room for negotiation in his tone. "I almost killed a man 3 minutes ago. I almost killed Henry because someone couldn't tell the difference between a real knife and a rubber prop. If you want to explain to the studio why we lost a day of shooting, that's your job. But if you want to explain to Henry's family why their father bled to death on a soundstage, that's a different conversation. Which one would you rather have?" The director opened his mouth, closed it, and then nodded slowly. "We shut down. Everyone take the rest of the day." The crew began to disperse, gathering equipment and personal belongings, murmuring among themselves about what they had just witnessed. The props department was already pulling every weapon from every case, laying them out on tables for inspection. Bruce watched them work for a moment, then walked over to where Henry Wong was still sitting in his chair. "Henry, how are you feeling?" The older actor looked up at Bruce, with eyes that were still slightly glazed. "I'm alive. Thanks to you. Thanks to luck. If I hadn't noticed the wait in time, but you did notice. That's the point." Henry set down his water glass and stood up slowly, as if testing whether his legs would support him. 30 years in this business, I've seen a lot of close calls. Stuntmen who broke bones, actors who got burned by pyrotechnics, a grip who lost 3 fingers to a falling light rig. But I've never been as close to dying as I was 3 minutes ago, and I didn't even know it was happening. Notice what Henry says next, because it reveals something important about the relationship between actors and the people they trust with their safety. "When you were coming toward me with that knife, I wasn't scared. Do you know why? Because I trusted you. I trusted that the blade was fake. I trusted that the props department had done their job. I trusted that the system would protect me." He shook his head slowly. "That trust almost got me killed." Bruce put a hand on Henry's shoulder. "The system failed today, but we caught it in time. Now we fix the system so it doesn't fail again." "You think you can actually do that? Change how things work on a Hong Kong film set? I can change how things work on my film sets. That's a start." The sound stage was nearly empty now. Most of the crew had gathered their things and left, eager to escape the tension that still hung in the air. The props department was still working at their tables, sorting weapons into piles and writing labels with permanent markers. The director was huddled with his assistant, probably figuring out how to explain the shutdown to the studio executives who would be expecting footage that would never come. Bruce stayed until the weapons inspection was complete. He personally examined every knife, every sword, every chain and hook and throwing star that would be used in the film. The real steel pieces, 12 in total, were placed in a heavy locked case that was painted bright red and labeled in both Chinese and English. Real weapons, not for filming. From now on, Bruce told the props supervisor, this case stays locked unless I personally unlock it. Nobody touches these pieces without my permission. Yes, Mr. Lee. And the rubber props, every single one, gets a small mark on the handle, something you can feel, even if you can't see it, so that when an actor picks up a weapon, they know instantly whether it's real or fake. The supervisor nodded and began organizing his team to implement the new protocols. Bruce watched them for a moment longer, then walked to the edge of the soundstage and sat down on a folding chair, suddenly aware of how tired he was. Here's something you need to understand about Bruce Lee in this moment. He wasn't thinking about the film anymore. He wasn't thinking about the schedule, or the budget, or the studio executives who would be angry about the lost day of shooting. He was thinking about the weight of that knife in his hand, the exact weight that had told him, in a fraction of a second, that something was terribly wrong. If he had been less experienced, if he had been less attuned to the feel of a weapon in his grip, if he had been moving even slightly faster, or thinking about his next line, or distracted by anything at all, Henry Wong would be dead right now. The thought kept circling back, refusing to let him go. A shadow fell across his chair. Bruce looked up to see the props assistant who had loaded the real knife, the young man with the thin beard and the nervous eyes. Mr. Lee, I wanted to apologize again. What I did was unforgivable. I'll understand if you want me removed from the production. Bruce studied the young man for a long moment. What's your name? Tommy. Tommy La. How long have you been working in props, Tommy? 8 months. This is my second film. 8 months. Bruce leaned back in his chair. And in those 8 months, has anyone ever taught you a formal safety protocol for handling weapons on set? Tommy hesitated. Not formally. I learned by watching the senior guys. They showed me where things were stored, how to clean the props, how to repair damage between takes. But there was no training session or anything like that. Listen to what Bruce realizes in this moment, because it changes how he thinks about the entire incident. So you made a mistake because nobody taught you how not to make it, and now you're offering to take responsibility for a failure that belongs to the whole system. Tommy looked confused. I was the one who loaded the knife. The mistake was mine. The mistake was yours. But the conditions that made the mistake possible, those weren't created by you. You didn't decide to keep real weapons in the same case as props. You didn't establish a system where junior crew members handled dangerous equipment without formal training. You just walked into a situation that was already broken and did what you'd been taught to do. So, you're not going to fire me. Bruce shook his head. Firing you wouldn't make anyone safer. It would just make you a scapegoat for problems that were here before you arrived and would be here after you left. What would make people safer is changing the system. And that's going to take time and effort from everyone on this production. He stood up and extended his hand. After a moment of surprise, Tommy shook it. You stay on this film, Bruce said, but you're going to help me implement the new safety protocols. You're going to learn them better than anyone else on the crew. And when this production is over, you're going to take what you learned and bring it to whatever film you work on next. That's how change happens. One person at a time, one production at a time, until the whole industry gets better. Stop here and think about what Bruce just did. A young crew member nearly caused a fatal accident. And instead of punishment, Bruce offered education. Instead of blame, he offered responsibility. Instead of making an example of Tommy, he turned Tommy into an example of how people can learn and grow from their mistakes. That night, Bruce went home to his apartment and sat alone in the dark for a long time. He didn't turn on the lights. He didn't pour himself a drink. He just sat in his chair and listened to the sounds of the city outside his window. Car horns, distant music, the occasional shout of street vendors closing up their stalls for the night. He kept thinking about the weight of the knife. about the fraction of a second that had separated a successful scene from a tragedy, about all the ways the day could have gone differently, and about Henry Wong's face, pale beneath the stage makeup, eyes wide with the delayed realization of how close he had come to death. If Henry had been standing an inch closer, if Bruce had been moving an inch faster, if his grip on the handle had been slightly different, masking the weight difference, if he had been tired, or distracted, or thinking about the next scene instead of the current one. So many variables, so many points where the chain of safety could have broken, and it had only taken a single moment of confusion in the props department to put a real weapon in his hand with a man's throat at the other end of its trajectory. Wait, because what Bruce does next will shape how every film he makes from this point forward is produced. He got up from his chair and walked to his desk, where a notebook lay open to a blank page. The desk lamp cast a warm circle of light in the otherwise dark room. He picked up a pen and began to write. The words came slowly at first, then faster as his thoughts organized themselves. He wrote about the incident on set, not to assign blame, but to analyze how it had happened. He wrote about the props case with its mixture of real and fake weapons, about the lack of formal safety training, about the pressure to work quickly that made people cut corners without realizing the risks. And then he wrote about solutions, a clear separation between real weapons and props, with color-coded cases and locks that required dual authorization to open, mandatory safety briefings before any scene involving weapons, even if the actors had performed similar scenes 100 times before, tactile markers on prop handles so that anyone could tell the difference between real and fake by touch alone, a designated safety officer on every production whose job was specifically to catch the mistakes that everyone else might miss. He wrote for 3 hours. When he finally set down his pen, the notebook contained 12 pages of densely written text, a comprehensive safety protocol that would become the foundation for how weapons were handled on every film Bruce Lee ever made. The following week, production resumed, but it resumed differently. Every morning before shooting began, Bruce gathered the entire cast and crew for a brief safety meeting. He reviewed the scenes they would be filming that day, identified the potential hazards, and reminded everyone of the new protocols. The meetings took 15 minutes. Some of the crew members complained, privately, that the time could be better spent setting up shots, but nobody complained loudly, and nobody complained to Bruce's face. The props department operated under a new system. Real weapons lived in the red case, which was kept locked and stored in a separate part of the soundstage. Rubber props lived in blue cases, and every single one now had a small raised bump on the handle, a tactile marker that could be felt instantly, even with gloves on. Before any weapon was used in a scene, both the actor and the safety officer inspected it and signed off on a form that was kept in a binder at the production office. It was slower. It was more complicated. It added paperwork and procedures to a process that had always been informal and improvisational. And it worked. The film wrapped 3 weeks later, without another safety incident. Henry Wong finished his scenes with all his blood inside his body. The props department developed a reputation for being the most organized and careful in the Hong Kong film industry. And Tommy Law, the young assistant who had almost caused a tragedy, became one of the most knowledgeable safety advocates on any set he worked on. If you followed this story to this point, you understand that what happened that day on the sound stage wasn't just about a knife. It was about the tension between speed and safety, between efficiency and care, between doing things the way they've always been done and doing things the way they should be done. Bruce Lee could have let the incident pass. He could have accepted the apology, replaced the knife, and resumed shooting without changing anything fundamental about how the production operated. That's what most people would have done. That's what the industry expected. But Bruce understood something that the industry didn't. Every close call is a preview of a disaster waiting to happen. The knife that almost killed Henry Wong was a warning, a chance to fix the system before it failed completely. Ignoring that warning would be like ignoring a crack in a dam and hoping the water would stay on the other side. If you want to hear about another moment when Bruce Lee faced a choice between what was easy and what was right, a night in his dojo when a grieving man walked in, looking for a fight, and found something else entirely, tell me in the comments. And while you're there, let me know, have you ever caught a mistake that could have been catastrophic if it had gone unnoticed? Some moments change everything. They look small from the outside. A knife caught in midair, a weight that feels slightly wrong, a decision made in less than 2 seconds, but they ripple outward in ways that reshape the world around them. Bruce Lee held a real blade in his hand for less than 3 seconds before he recognized it for what it was. In those 3 seconds, he saved a man's life. In the hours and days that followed, he used that moment to change how an entire production thought about safety. That's the legacy worth remembering, not the speed of his hands, or the power of his kicks, or the intensity of his presence on screen. The willingness to stop when something felt wrong. The courage to challenge a system that had always worked a certain way. The understanding that one near miss was enough. That waiting for someone to actually die was waiting too long. And somewhere in film studios around the world, the protocols he pioneered still save lives. Red cases for real weapons, blue cases for props, tactile markers on every handle, safety officers on every set, the slow accumulation of small precautions that add up to people going home to their families at the end of the day. That's the real ending to this story. Not the knife he caught, but the changes he made. Not the tragedy he prevented, but the system he built to prevent all the tragedies that might have come after. One true moment of attention. One decision to stop, one refusal to let things continue the way they had always been. That's what it takes to change an industry. That's what it takes to save lives. That's what it takes to be the kind of person who makes the world a little bit safer than he found it. Bruce Lee was that kind of person. And the weight of that real knife in his hand proved it.